Welcome to this week's episode of Stranger Stitches, where we light up the darkest corners of history and the tragedies of true crime. I'm sprinkle it with just enough sweet tea and southern charm to keep it very civilized. This story is from public sources and is not intended as a news article. We just gonna sit here on the porch and tell tales like folks do. So, pick your poison. Sit that shapely ass down and buckle up, Buttercup. Today, we're looking into the Michigan murders and John Norman Collins. And if y'all don't mind, I'm going to sit here and work on my crochet. Let me tell you what I know about the Michigan murders, and mercy damn, this ain't no bedtime story. Between the years of 1967 and 69, some sick-son bitch was prowling around the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti area of southeastern Michigan, turning them little college towns into his own personal hunting ground. Well, he got known by several names: the Ypsilanti Ripper, the Michigan Murderer, and the Co-Ed Killer. Yeah, y'all, he was the Co-Ed Killer before Edmund Kemper. Young ladies of this area were experiencing some new freedoms that their mamas hadn't had, and not realizing that some of those old practices were in place for good reason, and a few things had to be relearned. Well, just because your freedom was available to you didn't mean it was safe. Now, back in the day, girls would go around in pairs to protect their reputation so they wouldn't be seen out walking the streets alone. But now, they had to walk in the buddy system to keep their bodies safe. The bad guys knew this and played it to the hilt. This was also an era of victim blaming. If a woman was assaulted, it was her fault. She'd done something to entice it: short skirts, bare shoulders. They were all considered to be an advertisement for being that kind of girl. And the flower children of the day, they wanted to believe in a loving world where everybody was about love, peace, chicken grease, and nickel beer. But here they began to be guided in another direction, and the focus began to shift toward emphasizing the dangers faced by hitchhikers, and particularly young women, who were blamed if anything happened to them because they are the ones that had put themselves at risk. And Andrew Templeton states it very well in his documentary about this story. The social climate played into these murders. He suggests that if the woman's movement had been further along, the murders would not have taken place. Back then, women were raised to be polite and go along with what you were asked to do, which made them such easy targets for predators like Collins. Some of these victims, it is reported, went with him willingly, like to give directions or be helpful in some way. Or maybe they just wanted to take a motorcycle ride with a nice-looking college boy. In that time, I got to tell you, 7 women and girls died, all victims of the Michigan murderer. The young women were between ages of 13 and 21. Hey, let me give you just another little bite of what society was at the time. The Equal Pay Act was just enacted a few years before in 1963. It mandated that men and women in the same establishment receive equal pay for jobs requiring equal skill. So what these girls in college could be looking forward to was being able to earn a living wage on their own. And I'm sorry that that was taken from them. Now, if y'all don't hate John Norman Collins already, I'm going to give you another couple reasons, but let's begin at the begin. And I'm going to tell you what his childhood was like. This little piece of shit was born in June of 47 in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Right off the bat, life had dealt him a crap hand. His daddy took off when Collins was a baby, leaving Mama to fend for herself and her boy. And what happened next was like pouring gasoline on a fire. His mama kept marrying and divorcing a string of abusive alcoholic stepfathers who used to beat the tar out of the little boy. By age 9, this kid was watching a grown... I'm sorry, y'all, my dog is trying to be a little bit too much help. So by age 9, this kid is watching grown men use his mama as a punching bag. Now, I am not making excuses for what he became. Plenty folks have a shitty childhood and don't turn out to be monsters. but I would bet about $1 that all that violence he experienced planted some pretty dark seeds in his head. While he was in high school, he was sharp as a tack, honor student, athlete, and seemed to have his act together. After graduation, he enrolled in Eastern Michigan University, thinking to become an elementary school teacher. Can you imagine turning your little one over to the likes of him? That psychopath being around kids makes my stomach turn. Well, while he was in college, he pledged Theta Chi fraternity, probably thinking that he'd found his tribe, but those boys weren't stupid. They kicked his ass out of the fraternity on suspicion of stealing. And his grades started sliding downhill like butter off a biscuit, and he took to committing some petty thefts, just for thrills. He didn't need the money or the item he was taking. It was all about the rush, the power of getting over on somebody, and the feeling of taking what wasn't his. Some folks described Collins as being polite, quiet, and respectful, the kind of boy you'd want your daughter to bring home for Sunday dinner, but his ex-girlfriends had something else to say entirely. They saw the real Collins, and it wasn't pretty. They had recalled him being mad and angry most of the time and very sexually aggressive, the kind of man who would take what he wanted whether you said yes or no. That old bastard would fly into rages, make the house look like a hurricane, especially when he discovered a woman was on her cycle. He would call her really disgusting, like a woman's biology wasn't some kind of, insult to him. That sick fuck had what folks described as large sexual obsession and was into bondage. Now, that's fine if you'll have a consenting partner. Enjoy. And Collins was showing necrophiliac tendencies, meaning he kind of was interested in dead bodies. Well, they almost caught his sorry ass when he was returning to one of the scenes of the crime and wanting to relive his fantasies. If you want to look into a little bit of his philosophy, I have some quotes for you just from him. And listen to what Collins wrote in an English paper, and I shit you not, this is what he actually believed. And I quote, "If a person wants something, he alone is the deciding factor of whether or not to take it, regardless of what society thinks may be right or wrong. If a person holds a gun on somebody, it's up to him to decide whether to take a life or not. The point is, it's not society's judgment that's important, but the individual's own choice of will and intellect." End quote. Now, that right there told me everything I needed to know about how his mind worked. He genuinely believed that if he wanted to do something and murder innocent girls, that it was his God-given right to do so, and our society could kiss his ass. So Collins is some piece of work, and he had a definite type that he would go for. Not everybody fit this perfectly, but most were pretty close. He went after slender, brunette, Caucasian young women, girls barely out of their mom's house, ranging from 13 to 21 years old. The little girls that were at college, these girls had their whole lives ahead of them. Can you imagine? You're a parent, you're trying to do the right thing, and something happens to your kid after you convince them to go to college. Oh, I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it. And these girls were going to college and looking forward to participating in the new women's rights that they were now legally allowed. But I'll get off that soapbox. That's a story for another time. His M.O., modus operandi. This is what this monster did to these girls. He'd snatch them off the street, probably sweet-talk them, and, like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, and then abuse them, beat the ever-living shit out of them, stab them like a madman, and strangle the life out of their bodies. But he wasn't done there. These babies were already gone to meet the maker. He would mutilate their bodies, cutting off their breasts, shoving branches into private areas. Oh, that makes my skin crawl. Investigators noticed that each victim had been on her cycle at the time of her death. Investigators strongly believe that this fact had invoked an extreme rage evident in the sexual motivation of her murder. This information suggests that this psychopath had a twisted hatred toward women's natural biology, something that should have been as normal as breathing to a decent human being. Now, I have questions. Can y'all noodle this out with me for a minute? How did he know they were on their cycle? Did he try something with them and then get disgusted? Were there other victims that lived because they weren't bleeding? And then, like we talked about, they wouldn't have made a report because it would have been their fault anyway. And they would have had to take that shame home and explain it to their parents. Yeah, I'm gonna worry about that for a long time. But let me tell you how they finally caught up with this guy. And it's a story that made me believe in divine intervention. The police had been working their butts off trying to catch him, and they'd put together a profile and even had some sketches floating around, but every lead seemed to turn into fool's gold. Each new murder brought frustration, dead ends, and wild goose chases that led nowhere. In July of 1969, they even brought in Dutch psychic named Peter Herkos, believing that maybe something supernatural could do what good old-fashioned police work couldn't. Leaving no stone unturned is what they were thinking. But that didn't come to anything either. When it seemed like this sumbitch might never get caught, the Michigan State Police stepped in and took over the investigation. Sometimes it just takes fresh eyes, and the local PD was probably doing all they could with what they had to work with. Michigan State Police had a lot more officers and a lot more resources. And then came the break that would finally paste Colin's sorry hide to the wall, and it came from a person I wouldn't have expected. John Norman Collins' uncle, David Leake, was a Michigan State trooper who'd sworn to uphold the law and serve and protect from the very kind of evil his own nephew had now become. Now, David didn't turn in Collins directly, but what he discovered would be the key that finally put that monster away for good. And here's how all that went down. When David Leake and his family got back from their summer vacation, they were probably tired and just wanting to settle in and get back to their old routine. David's wife had given the children haircuts before they left town. And she'd swept all those little clippings up into neat little piles in the basement, probably going to clean them up when she got home. But when David went down to check on things around the basement, what he found made his blood run cold. Instead of those tidy little piles of hair that his wife had left behind, there was a goddamn mess scattered all over the basement floor. Hair mixed with what looked suspiciously like bloodstains. David is a trained law enforcement officer, so he knew trouble when he saw it. And while the Leake family had been off enjoying their vacation and Karen Benneman was meeting her horrible end, Collins, their own flesh and blood, who had been staying in their house supposedly just to feed their dog and have a place to stay, any good nephew would be doing this. This lying, murdering bastard had used the uncle's basement as his own personal torture chamber. Yeah. Knowing that there had been murders in town while he was gone, Trooper Leake thought about what he was seeing, and it looked pretty sus to him. So, it is true that he didn't turn in his nephew. He did have investigators come over and take a look. Well, the investigators got over there and started looking around at what David had found. They swarmed that basement like fire ants, and what they discovered would finally give them the evidence they needed. Those hair clippings scattered around the basement, they matched perfectly with the ones they had found on Karen Benneman's underwear. So that sick buck had been so careless and cocky that he'd left his calling card right there. Yeah, in his own uncle's house. Can you imagine What must have been going through David Leake's mind? Here he is, a man who'd sworn an oath to protect and serve, discovering that his own nephew, a boy he'd probably bounced on his knee or taken fishing, was the monster who had been terrorizing their community. Well, this evidence, combined with all the other circumstantial things they'd been gathering, finally gave them enough to pull him in. Collins was arrested on July 31st, 1969, and justice was about to be served, and it came courtesy of a state trooper who had to turn in his own kin. Collins was arraigned on August 1st, 1969, and the whole community felt like they could sleep a little easier. So, Collins' reign of terror came to an end when they arrested him for the murder of Karen Sue Bannerman. Yeah, that was right shortly after her body was found. And let's hear the evidence they had about him regarding Karen Sue. She was an EMU freshman, probably still homesick, calling her mama. And this sweet little girl made the last mistake of her life when she accepted a ride on a motorcycle from a man who turned out to be Collins. 3 days later, they found her body. And what that monster had done to her make you lose faith. She'd been strangled, beaten, and abused in ways that would make you cry. But there's a detail that nailed his ass to the wall. Yeah, that's where they found those human hair clippings, less than 3/8 of an inch long, and they was on her panties. And now we know where those clippings came from. That's what tied it all together. That was the smoking gun. In addition to that, they could also tie her to the scene by finding blood stains in that basement that matched Karen Sue's blood type. Now, that was kind of a big deal in the day. It was the first case in the nation that had been done with that kind of hair analysis. Now, the blood typing, that was kind of a common thing, and they were doing the best they could. But add it all together, and it paints a pretty clear picture. So, he goes on trial for Karen Sue's murder on June 30th, 1970, right there in Washtenaw County where he'd been doing his killing. Well, the prosecution's pretty smart. They focused solely on the Bannerman case because they had him dead to rights with physical evidence. Collins, probably on the advice of his lawyers who knew he was guilty, chose not to testify. Smart move, because every time he opened his mouth, stupid fell out. On August 19th, 1970, 12 good citizens looked at the evidence and unanimously found Collins guilty of first-degree murder. They sentenced him to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. At 23 years old, he became the youngest inmate at Southern Michigan Prison to get slapped with a life sentence. Justice was served cold, just as it should be. This was the only murder they pinned on him. He was already doing life, so why waste the court's time and resources trying the others? Nothing would change. And I kind of feel, and this is just from me, that those other victims deserved their day in court as well. Thank goodness they caught him and all. But it just seems to fall a little short by my own standards. So, even after getting his ass convicted fair and square, Collins spent decades claiming that he's innocent. About as believable as a $9 bill, right? In 1977, this lion sack of shit gave an interview to the Ann Arbor News where he vehemently denied his guilt in any of the Michigan murders. He claimed key evidence was hidden, that the jury was bullied, and witness identifications were false. Basically every excuse in the book except the dog ate my homework. He pulled the same BS act on the Detroit morning news show Kelly and Company in 1988, stating with a straight face, "No, I never met Karen Sue Bannerman. I never picked her up on my bike, never took her to my uncle's house." He also had the big brass balls to complain about being labeled a serial killer for crimes he claimed, and I quote, he haven't done. And we're supposed to feel sorry for his reputation? Give me a break. So even after the conviction, I guess this is on the appeals side of things, Collins and his slick-talking attorneys pulled out every excuse in the playbook, crying foul about police tactics and claiming witnesses were being strong-armed into identifications. His attorney, Neil Fink, was cocky enough to think he'd had the prosecution beat, bragging that their defense would be blowing the prosecution's case out of the water when it came to the hair evidence. But here's the thing that shut everybody up real quick. What Fink called the unspoken evidence, soon as they locked Collins' ass up, those murders stopped. Like somebody had flipped a switch. The whole community finally took a breath. Now, that wasn't any coincidence. It wasn't. That was proof, walking around on two legs. Well, there was some courtroom shenanigans before the trial even got rolling. Collins' defense team filed a motion trying to throw out witness testimony from two folks. They pitched a fit about the police showing these witnesses Collins' photograph after his arrest, but before a lineup, claiming it was all kinds of improper since the lawyer wasn't there. The defense hollered that this impermissible procedure had poisoned the well for any future identification, but the judge wasn't having it. He wasn't there for any of it. He denied the motion, faster than you can say guilty, ruling that this witness could identify Collins just fine based on what they'd seen with their own two eyes, photograph or no. And there got whispering around some word about evidence tampering. And there's been loose talk over the years, and maybe, just maybe, some evidence got planted to make sure Collins stayed put. Word was that certain folks might have added a little to the insurance policy in this conviction for Karen Sue's murder. Somehow, it would get overturned. It got overturned. But, honey, that's all it ever was. It was gossip and speculation. Nobody ever proved a damn thing during the investigation or trial, so it stays filed under rumors and wishful thinking by the Collins supporters. Even behind bars, this SOB can't sit still and accept his fate. The crazy old thing has tried breaking out more times than a jack-in-the-box, getting himself in hot water with prison officials every time, stashing escape tools. And he at one time had a 27-foot rope in his cell. How'd he get that? Can you believe the unmitigated gall? Here he is, having destroyed countless lives and families, and still thinks he deserves to be out there walking free? Some people just never learn that actions have consequences. In the early 1980s, Collins legally changed his name to Chapman. That was his mama's maiden name, probably thinking a new name would wash away some of his sins. He applied multiple times to get transferred to a Canadian prison, believing it would improve his chances of getting paroled under Canadian law. Those requests were shot down real quick due to public outrage, and even the Canadians didn't want this piece of trash on their side of the line. As of 2024, John Norman Chapman, although a turd by any other name still stinks, is 78 years old, rotting away at G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility in Michigan, serving his life sentence. And every year he gets older is another year those families don't ever have to worry about him walking free. His prison profile also states that he's had an open heart surgery and received a pacemaker. While Collins only got convicted for the Benjamin murder, law enforcement and anybody with two brain cells rubbing together believe he is responsible for all of the murders. That would be 6 in Michigan and 1 way out in California. And here's the kicker. After they locked his ass up, all the murders stopped. And that's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. The signature and dump sites were the same. And I know, my goodness. Okay, I'm going to go on and talk about some of the other murders. And I'm going to try not to get too one-sided about it. But there were some things that would give me to believe that he was guilty of all of it. So let me get through this next little part, and we'll see what you think as well. So Collins gets this slick-talking lawyer, and they pulled out every excuse in the playbook, crying foul about police tactics and claiming witnesses were being strong-armed into identifications. His attorney, Neil Fink, was cocky enough to think he had the prosecution beat, bragging that their defenses would be blowing the prosecution's case out of the water when it came to that hair evidence. But here's the thing that shut everybody up real quick, and Fink himself called it unspoken evidence. Soon as they locked Collins up, those murders stopped. Like somebody just flipped a switch, the whole community could take a breath. And that was not coincidence. That is what I call cause and effect. So, even before the appeals process gets rolling, Collins' defense team files a motion to throw out witness testimony from two folks. They pitched a fit about the police showing these witnesses photographs of Collins after his arrest, but before any proper lineup, claiming it was all kinds of improper since the lawyer wasn't there. The defense hollered that this was impermissible procedure and had poisoned the well for any future identification. But the judge wasn't there for any of that. He was not buying what they were selling. He denied the motion faster than you can say guilty, ruling that the witnesses could identify Collins just based on what their own two eyes saw, photographs or no. And then came around the whispering about evidence tampering. And there had been some loose talk over the years that maybe, just maybe, some evidence got planted to make sure that Collins stayed put. Word was that certain folks might have added a little insurance policy to the evidence in the case of the conviction for Karen Benneman's murder. And, yeah, well, that's all it ever was. Gossip and speculation. Nobody ever proved a damn thing during the investigation or the trial or the appeal, so it stays filed under rumors and wishful thinking by Collins' supporters. So even behind bars, this SOB is not willing to accept his fate. The crazy old bastard was trying to break out. He tried it more times than a jack in the box, getting himself in hot water with prison officials every time, stashing escape tools in his cell. And one of his tools was a 27-foot rope. Now, how did he get his hands on that, and where did he hide it? Can you believe that unmitigated vol? Here he is, having destroyed countless lives and families, and still thinks he deserves to be out walking free? Some people just don't learn. Well, in the early, 1980s, Collins legally changed his name to Chapman, and that was his mama's maiden name, probably thinking a new name would wash away some sin. He applied multiple times to get transferred to a Canadian prison, believing it would improve his chances of ever getting a parole under Canadian law. And those requests got shot down real quick due to public outrage. Yeah, the Canadians are nice people, and they didn't want him. So, as of 2024, John Norman Chapman, although a turd by any other name, still stinks, and he is 78 years old, rotting away in the G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility in Michigan, serving out his life sentence. And every year he gets older, and that's another year those families don't have to worry about him ever walking free. His prison profile also states that he's had an open heart surgery. Yeah, and he's got a scar right down the middle of his chest, and he's gotten a pacemaker. While Collins was only ever convicted for the Benneman murder, law enforcement and anybody with two brain cells rubbing together knows that he's responsible for all 7, 6 in Michigan and 1 way out in California. Yeah, but still, that unspoken evidence. After they arrested him, the murder stopped. Yeah, but in the other ones, what ties it together for me is the signature, the condition that the persons were found in, and the dump sites, all the same. So he would take his victims' bodies within a 15-mile radius of Washtenaw County, usually in places that were kind of lonely and a little bit deserted, like abandoned farmhouses, deep gullies, but not too far out of the way because he did want them to be found. He wanted the world to see his handiwork. And this, oh my gosh, here we go. The crazy bastard would sometimes come back to where he left them, getting his rocks off all over again. So now you know what happened to him and how it happened. Let's see if I think these other victims could have gotten their day in court, or, as you may see in a little bit, maybe he had some help. So let's go on and look at some of the other cases that were, I believe, part of his series. Mary Therese Fleeser, she's 19 years old, an accounting student at Eastern Michigan University. July 9th, 1967, around 9 o'clock, this girl was walking back to her Ypsilanti apartment when evil came calling. A neighbor witnessed the whole damn thing twice. Saw some guy in a blue-gray Chevrolet slow down and try to talk to her. Well, she didn't fall for it. The witness said, I saw her shake her head and walk away both times, but Collins didn't give up. Mary never made it home that night. Her roommate called her parents the next morning, and just like that, the family's world fell apart. Nearly a month later, on August 7th, two 15-year-old boys stumbled across Mary's body at an abandoned farmhouse in Superior Township. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The pathologist had to identify her through dental records because that monster had butchered her. Stabbed her about 30 times in the chest and abdomen, cut off her feet just above the ankles, chopped off her thumb and fingers, and severed one whole forearm. And you know it, those parts were never found. Even after a month of decomp, you could still see where she had the hell beaten out of her before her life was taken. You ready to taste bile in the back of your throat? That sick bastard kept coming back to mess with her body. The crime scene showed he'd moved her 3 different times during the month that she laid there. First, he'd hidden her behind some elder trees on a pile of bottles and cans. Then he dragged her 5 feet into a field where she stayed and was exposed to the elements. Right before those boys found her, that crazy fucker come back one more time and moved her another 3 feet. Can you imagine? No. I don't know why I say that. I don't want you to imagine. But he was getting his kicks by visiting the victim like some twisted little gravekeeper. Here's the part I warn y'all about. 2 days after Mary's remains had been identified, some young man showed up at the funeral home claiming to be a friend of the family, asking if he could take a photograph of Mary in her coffin as a keepsake for the parents. They told him absolutely not, and then this bastard had the nerve to ask, "You mean you can't fix her up enough so I could just get one picture of her?" Well, the funeral home folks are freaked out, and they told him, just get the hell out. And he left without another word. And he didn't even have a camera on him. The receptionist could describe him, and she said he's a handsome man, dark-haired white boy, about 20 years old, driving a blue-gray Chevrolet. Same type that had been stalking her. And here's a connection. Yeah. Collins worked at an office directly across the street from Mary's at EMU. He spent his days watching her coming and going and planning his attack like a spider waiting on a fly. When police finally searched his room, they found a Canadian silver dollar that had gone missing from Mary's belongings. It was her lucky coin. Coincidence? I don't think so. I think he was keeping trophies. Eileen Adams, age 13, found in January of 1968, and she's just a baby, just 13. Should have been more worried about middle school crushes and slumber parties, not becoming prey for some murderous bastard. Well, he assaulted her the same way he had done the other ones. And she hadn't even started her cycle yet. Oh, but then he strangled her with an electrical cord. But that wasn't enough for this human garbage. He beat her with a hammer. And then he drove a nail into her head. And for Christ's sake, what kind of depraved animal does that to anyone, much less a child? Her poor mama probably had packed her lunch that morning, kissed her goodbye, and never imagined that that would be the last time. Joan Shell, age 20, last seen alive on June 30th, 1968. Probably just thinking that she was getting a ride from what seemed to be a nice college boy. Poor Joan was found a week later on July 7th. And, yeah, I don't have to tell you. Same. Stabbed her 47 times. Can you imagine the rage it takes to do that? Slashed her throat so deep it nearly took her head off. Tied her with her own miniskirt around her neck, marking his territory like some sort of dog. Collins lived across the street from Joan, watching her come and go just as he had done one of the others, studying her routine, sizing up his prey. Multiple people saw them together that last night, though of course he denied it like the thing that he is. His roommate, Arnold Davis, later grew a conscience and admitted Collins told him that he had dropped Joan off after she had become sexually uncooperative, meaning that brave girl had fought back against his advances, probably scratched and clawed for her life. Davis also said Collins kept Joan's red handbag right there in their apartment like some kind of trophy. I'm telling y'all, he's keeping trophies so he could look at it every day and relive what he did to her. Oh, my word. Okay, this next one, we for sure can't pin on him, but I'm going to give you what I know, and then you make up your own mind whether he was involved or not. Jane Louise Mixer, age 23, found March 21st, 1969, near the Ypsilanti Cemetery. Jane was a grown woman, making her way in the world, working or going to school, dreams and plans. Just like everybody else, she was assaulted, beaten, and stabbed. And same MO, same signature. And it was real messed up because for decades, everybody and their brother assumed Collins killed Jane. It fit his pattern. Happened right there in his hunting ground. Had all the hallmarks of his signature. But in 2005, long after we thought the case was closed, DNA evidence pointed a finger at a completely different monster, a retired nurse named Gary Lederman, who's been walking around free as a bird all those years, probably thinking he had literally gotten away with murder. This revelation threw a wrench in the works and making folks wonder if there had been two different killers prowling those same streets, feeding off each other's evil like it was some sick competition. The thought is scarier than a rattlesnake in your sleeping bag, but don't let it fool you. Just because Collins might not have done that one doesn't mean he didn't do the others. Marilyn Skelton, age 16, found March 25th, 1969. Another teenager who should have been more worried about prom dresses and graduation than instead of... And the report goes that she was thoroughly bludgeoned with a kind of rage. He didn't just kill her quick and clean. He took his sweet time. He used a stick or a branch, savagely rammed, the report says, in much the same way as he had done before, then mercilessly flogged her with a heavy strap, probably getting off on every scream and every plea for mercy. Well, Marilyn used to hang out next door to an apartment that Collins often went to. He probably saw her around, watched her hanging out and laughing with friends, observed her innocent flirtation with boys of her own age, and decided that wouldn't she be perfect? She was just a kid who trusted the wrong person. Yeah, she was one of the ones that voluntarily went with him. Her future, her dreams, her very life were gone. Dawn Basom, another 13-year-old. And I don't have to tell you because I get tearful just rereading this, and I know I had some tissues when I was sitting down writing this. Well, they found her clothes in a similar electrical cord that the things that he's done before in a farmhouse that investigator believes was one of his killing grounds. Imagine the place of that horror. Well, and this next one I kind of have my doubts about too. This was Alice Colomb, age 23. She was found June 9th, 1969. Alice was a grown woman, thinking that she was street smart enough to handle herself. Well, she was shot in the head, execution style. Maybe she saw too much of his face. Maybe she fought too hard. His methods might have been escalating, but this was a shooting. And he hadn't done that before. But killing her wasn't enough. He did the same things, used the same methods that he had done before. But the arrogant bastard is sloppy. And what they found was that his cockiness started catching up with him. Colin's boot print was found on her skirt, clear as day, just like he'd signed his name to the crime. They found bloodstains matching Alice's blood type in his car and on his raincoat. That was some sick. The forensic evidence was piling up like cordwood, directly linking him to the crime. The only thing that separates that for me is the gunshot. If he was working with somebody else, could the other person have shot him? You know, if they were in cahoots, who really knows what happens? Now we come to the victim in California, Roxy Ann Phillips, age 17. And this case proves that Colin's evil was not contained to Michigan. That sumbitch was spreading his poison clear across the country, like traveling plague. Roxy disappeared June 30th, 1969, probably thinking that she was going to have some grand adventure with some boy in the back seat, and he was from out east, and he rode motorcycles and had a kind of dangerous appeal, and don't we all love a bad boy? They found her body July 13th in a ravine near Carmel, California, strangled until her windpipe collapsed, left naked, beaten to hell and back, and, all the usual things that he did. Well, here's the thing. Collins and his roommate, Andrew Manuel, had traveled to Salinas, California in a stolen camper trailer right before Roxy disappeared. These two pieces of human garbage were living like nomads, probably thinking the Golden State would be their personal hunting ground where nobody knew their faces or crimes. And that poor girl had just told a friend she'd met John from Michigan. Ain't that a coinky-dink? And he drove a silver Oldsmobile Cutlass. Now, there are some models that look very similar in the color. I don't know if she could have told the models apart. I don't know. Some girls can. I can. Anyhow, they rode motorcycles, and the description fit Collins like a glove. When the police finally got around to searching Collins' belongings back in Michigan, they found pubic hairs matching Roxy's DNA tucked away on a sweater in his closet, like a keepsake. Well, the California authorities weren't burned yesterday. They issued a grand jury indictment against Collins for Roxy's murder. Ready to fry his ass if they had to. But they decided not to extradite him since he was already serving life without parole in Michigan, rotting away. Some justice just has to settle for good enough. And at least they knew you would never walk free and hurt another innocent girl. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many other Roxys there were in other states, other towns, where a charming college boy on a motorcycle rolled through and left nothing but heartbreak and shallow graves. These murders had scared the living bejesus out of everybody, especially college girls who were trying to get their education. The whole atmosphere of those college towns changed overnight. What used to be a carefree campus full of laughing young people turned their lives upside down. Sales of tear gas, knives, security locks. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of daddies were buying those for their girls and installing those locks themselves. All but the bravest or dumbest girls stopped hitchhiking altogether, and back then, that was like taking away their mainstay of transportation. But these were the days before everybody had cars, and sticking out your thumb was as normal as breathing. Nobody accepted rides from anybody. It wasn't worth the risk. Some girls dropped out altogether, or their parents pulled them home, too scared for their young girls to stay in that place. And those that did stay, hoping and praying every day that their daughter, sister, friend wouldn't be the next name in the obits. Y'all want to know why we don't know more about this case? Yeah, it was because Colin's trial got buried under the headlines of the Charles Manson murders. Yep, y'all, exactly the same time. And the Manson cases sucked up all the national attention. International media abandoned every case but his. But local Michigan reporters dug in and kept reporting. National coverage went towards bigger, more high-profile, shiny stories. And some evidence we look at still suggests that Collins might not have been acting alone, but the character that he is, don't you think that he would have rolled on somebody? Joan Michelle was last seen with Collins and two other men. One was Arnold Davis, who later testified against Collins, but they never identified that third man. Collins was seen with other people during attempted abductions. Andrew Manuel, Collins' partner in petty theft, and his roommate, the one who went with him to California, was also a suspect but never charged. Makes you wonder. It does. And Collins himself would never speak to it. And there's still a lot of questions. Collins, and this was his quote, "Some were ravaged, some aren't. Some are fully clothed, and some pornographic objects were stuck inside them." See, I can't even say this because of YouTube's terms and policies, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this one already, but I hope you get what I'm saying. Porn objects, or, adult objects, were used. And it sounds like the Boston Strangler thing, so it could be copycats. And this is what Collins is saying about it. You know something? There's no way that I would be convinced that one person ever did it. Yeah, and he's saying that like talking in the third person. But even a broken clock is right twice a day. And that's what he said. So true crime enthusiasts are still calling this a study case for Ted Bundy. And I do see that they did have a lot in common. Good-looking college boys used their wholesome appearance to lure people. You know, I might do an episode like that, just an episode about what a lot of people had in common. But the moral of the story, Greg Fournier, in his documentary about this case, sums it up pretty well, that we can take a lesson from all this horror. Please don't accept people at face value. Many people have said to me that Collins doesn't look like a serial killer. Well, my question to them was, what does a serial killer look like? Ultimately, if something doesn't feel right about a person, trust your instincts. And this is from me. If your best friend or your dog don't like them, you don't like them either. The kindness in your heart might want you to give everyone a chance, and I'm proud of you for that. But don't place yourself in a compromised position and recognize danger when it's too late. It's okay to make friends with strangers, but you don't have to run off with them, and you don't have to have them over the house until you know them a little bit better. Well, that's my lecture for today, and evil doesn't always look like a monster under your bed. Sometimes it looks like a boy next door, the college student, the charming young man on the motorcycle. But trust your gut, keep your guard up, and remember, the devil's greatest trick is making you think he doesn't exist. That's me for this week, y'all. Sweet dreams. I'll see you next time.